Thanks, Leslie, for the good introduction. Thanks, Fireman Creative. We got some really cool videos that we're going to show everybody. While we're watching, it's going to be broken up into 5 different videos. And then in between each video, we're going to stop and do question and answer. So I've got my dad here, Denny Hickman. Mike McKain's here as well. He's our forester. And if you think of questions while you're watching it, go ahead and type it into the chat, and then Leslie can help facilitate questions while we do that. And if anybody's with NWFA University and wants credits, send a message through chat as well, and we can make sure you get those credits for you. I think that's everything I have.
Okay, and I'll just let everybody know, we're playing these 5 videos over Zoom. The first one is going to be 12 minutes long. It's going to give you a really good background into the process. And then each video after that is about 5 to 7 minutes. If you have any kids in your house that would be interested in this, feel free to bring them over. It's like a field trip, like I said. There may be parts of the video that are a little bit choppy. We've optimized everything that we could to play these over Zoom, so there may be little choppy parts. If it's really bad on your end, send a message in the chat because you can't always see what everybody else is seeing when you're on Zoom in terms of quality. But again, we'll all turn off our videos while Anthony plays, and these will all be available on YouTube afterwards as well. But we're gonna break in between each one, like Jessica said, so that she and Denny and Mike can answer your questions. Okay, so Anthony, I think we're ready. We're all going to turn off our video.
Welcome to Emlenton, Pennsylvania. We're in Allegheny Mountain Hardwood Flooring and Hickman Lumber showroom. I'm Jessica Hickman Fresch.
I'm Jessica's father, Denny Hickman. Today we're going to be taking a tour. We're going to take you out to the woods, timberland by FSC certification standards. We'll go to the sawmill where we'll see logs being cut into quarter sawn. We'll show you how we dry quarter sawn lumber. Then we'll take you to the flooring plant and show you how we take that lumber and turn it into some of the finest flooring anywhere in the world.
So my first memory of this property was when I came up here as a tag-along hunting with my uncle in about 1942. And you could see from here clear to the other side of the property. It was that much of a clear cut. So we were able to buy this property in the mid-60s and start our management work in here. We first cut with a thinning and stand improvement cut. But it's quite a story of how this property regenerated and what you can do with proper management. It's been very interesting. Now there were a few saplings standing around here and there, but basically there was very little timber here at that time, and it's just amazing. I mean, when you think of how many years ago it was, but it still it came back very good. It shows what Mother Nature can do if you help her out a little bit. In 1948, we moved from what we called the farm to a new location where Dad had bought some land. He wanted to start a stationary mill. He was tired of moving around to the different jobs. So in 1948, we started. I was 12 years old at that time. He started a permanent sawmill. So it wasn't long after that till I was helping on the mill, just do small jobs and things. And then we just grew from there. When I graduated school and worked for several furniture companies for a while to get that field the end of the business, and that's when we expanded into the furniture type product we do today, pretty much. I guess you could say I'm the third generation of artists. I don't do artwork like Dad and Granddad did, but I consider this beautiful work here art as well. When Dad and I went together in the 60s, he didn't own very much timberland. So we decided that we needed a little more backup. So we bought quite a bit of timberland at that point in time. It was readily available at a really good price. So we started doing that and managing the timber in a sustainable way. And right now we're actually growing more timber than we're harvesting. Sustainable forestry really works. So that's pretty much the way we supply ourselves, other than we do buy timber and logs from other people as well.
Tree that was just cut was a white oak. It was marked to make room for the seedlings that are on the ground. There's a bunch of white oak seedlings right here. Good regeneration. It will be our next forest. The other thing is this hickory tree right here is a good wildlife species. This was left. It'll produce a different type of food for the wildlife. This opening creates the extra sunlight that's needed for those seedlings to take off and grow now. One of the important things that we try to do is show that this is sustainable. A lot of people think that when you cut a tree, trees are gone. So by doing proper forest management, which has been going on for hundreds of years, you can show that this is sustainable. There's two nice white oak over there behind you, which was part of the reason that this tree was cut, to allow those two trees to continue to grow. Mm-hmm. If you don't take some of them out, they get stunted, just like taking the weeds out of your garden. If you don't weed your garden, your tomatoes don't grow.
Part of the thing with the select harvesting, you're picking out specific trees. He's looking at what's going on, and you can see all these. There's just a scat of white oak seedlings here. So by taking this tree out, we're opening up the canopy that this sunlight's going to get down here, and these are just going to explode. This is our next generation of our high-value timber that's coming here. This tree right here is probably 10 years old. That one we just cut was probably 80.
Here's a group of acorns and hickory nuts that I picked up out of the woods here. This is our seed for our next generation of forest. Seed is produced here. Very rarely do we have to replant unless there's some kind of a catastrophic occurrence on the forest. These will fall to the ground and sprout and become the next seedlings and trees in the woods.
Basically, sustainable management is growing as much as you're harvesting. It's a renewable resource which is very manageable. It has to do with the density of the timber that you allow to grow, and just basically common sense and trial and error, which I've had plenty of time to try.
Since the Hickman family's owned this property, it's made quite a comeback. The first inventory I have for this property is 1990. There was 497,000 board feet of timber here. And that year we salvaged 219,000 board feet from a blowdown. 8 years later, 1998, we did another inventory before we did a harvest, and there was 597,000 board feet. So in that short 8 years, it grew 100,000 board feet. That year we cut 70,000 board feet out of here to kind of clean up what we hadn't got in the salvage. And in 2007, we scheduled it again to be cut. And at that time, there was 752,000 board feet. So it continues to grow. 2017, we cut 132,000 board feet. So since we started here in 1990 at 497,000 board feet, we've cut 568,000 board feet off this property. So we've more than removed what we started with, and we're still left with over 1 million board feet.
So it was probably in the late 90s, 1998, 99, somewhere, one of my foresters brought me a pamphlet about the Forest Stewardship Council. And I looked at it briefly, and my initial reaction was, yeah, right, I need Al Gore telling us how to grow oak trees. But as I looked at it, I said, well, this is what we're doing anyway. One of the things that my father always tried to do is to get private landowners involved in the long-term management of their timberland. But we fight a stereotype in that people just think that sawmills are these crazy-eyed guys with chainsaws that run around raping and pillaging, you know. But by getting involved with the FSC, it's a really great deal for the private landowner who really doesn't know what's right or wrong to do with their timber, because once a year we get an audit. We get these people show up, we've got to take them, show them what we did, how we decided what we cut, what we left, how did we leave the road. The woods roads, we cleaned them up, we seeded them, we didn't put mud into trout streams, these type of things. Here I come along, third generation. They've been doing this stuff in the woods all these years with a plan. Who am I to screw that up, right? I'm going to continue what they've already started because what they're doing was right. And, you know, we've got a clipping out of the newspaper where my grandfather was getting an award from the tree farm in the 60s, okay? So this proper stewardship is not something that's new to us. We didn't just jump on the bandwagon because it's a cool thing to do right now. This is what we've been doing since they started this for a long time. And I was always proud of the way that my dad and grandfather managed their timber, because they didn't high grade it. If cherry was a strong thing, they didn't go out and hit all the cherry trees. They managed the timber for what was best for that piece of woods. And subsequently, we've probably got, you know, the best managed timber in Western Pennsylvania because of what they started way back when.
The sustainability part of, you know, our business is really important to me. It's something that, you know, I love being out in the woods. You know, I care a lot about what the future is going to be like for my little girls, you know, and hoping it's a healthy planet for them. And so the fact that my family is already working the company, and the philosophy of the business is let's tend to the forest and let's make sure we're taking better care of it than, you know, was even before they started with it. You know, they're growing more trees than we're cutting. We're growing at least, you know, some of it's like 3 times as many trees that we're growing to what we harvest. And we make a good product out of it too, you know. We're doing good for the environment, but we're also making a good product for people in their homes and flooring that it's gonna last. The carbon that tree takes in while it's growing over its life, that carbon's stored in the tree and then it's put in a floor, then that carbon stored in the flooring lasts hundreds of years. There's no other flooring product that can last that long in the house, and it can even change in the house too. It can change styles, you know. I mean, tile can last a long time, but you can't change the look of it. Wood floors can be refinished, and it can go from a gray floor, which is in fashion right now, or it can be refinished to, you know, it could be dark brown in 10 years, and you can refinish it and it can change, but it can still the same floor. So your return on the investment of the wood floor is huge because of that, because it lasts so long. And the natural product is good for your health of your family. The wood flooring does not harbor allergens, so it's cleaner indoor air quality. It's a really big benefit for your house, and also just bringing the nature indoors. You know, the energy you get from outside and being in nature, you're bringing that inside. You know, there's studies recently that are showing that these building with more natural products, you know, wood and having plants and just natural products are helping with anxiety and helping lower stress and help promote creativity, and using wood indoors they're actually having studies that are proving this, so it's pretty cool. The green building industry is pushing more towards using more wood products throughout the whole building structure.
Awesome. Great. Before we go into questions with Jessica, can a couple of you turn on your video, give me a thumbs up if that played well for you, or put it in the chat? Kristen, good. Thank you. Pretty good. Awesome. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Okay, cool. So we're going to take just a couple of minutes before we go into the next part of the process to do some questions with Mike and Jessica and Denny. I had a question in the chat, and then I have a couple of other ones too. So one of the questions that we might get into a little bit more, and first I want to do a little test on Jessica, Mike, and Denny's sound. Can we hear you guys?
Unmute it. Can you hear us now?
There we go. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. So there's a question. Do you guys sell a lot of FSC certified floors? What is the demand like?
We do. It's mostly to more like the institutional type of places. We've got a big project going on now with Columbia University. In the past, we've done recently the Peabody Museum at Yale University, things like this. We don't see it so much with just the average person. One of the things that frustrates me with the FSC program, and I'll just elaborate on this right now, is that the FSC has done a poor job at educating the architects and designers about what we as the primary producers are bringing out of the woods. So much of the time, like this project with Columbia, it's 4-inch clear, quarter sawn white oak, all 7 to 12 foot long. If people were more genuine and taken into account, like I said, what we're bringing out of the woods, they would use more of the random grades, random widths with the natural grade, utilize that whole log instead of just cherry picking, the very high end stuff, and then let's put the FSC sticker on it so we all feel good about it. I mean, I need to sell stuff, we sell it, but it frustrates me that more of the designers and architects aren't using the full product of the log as it comes out, and to be more, you know what I'm saying?
More sustainable.
So
More
like,
Sustainable.
yeah, consumer education. I think that's something that we hear a lot, from manufacturers, is closing that loop between the manufacturer and the specifier, and how to ensure that that information is getting across. And I think that, that's a really good note. I think one thing that can help towards that, that we see a lot is through, different types of green building rating systems or certifications. The project teams are rewarded for selecting those types of products. And so I think that helps a little bit with that market shift, but certainly, educating consumers is really important. Kristen, I see that you have a question. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Sometimes my computer microphone also doesn't work, but yeah, this is so great. So thank you guys for putting this on. I was curious about I have 2 questions. One is, how many acres of forest do you manage? Or I don't know how you tally it up, but how much forest do you actually manage? And then follow-up question is, have you ever calculated the positive impact you're having on carbon sequestration, or you've done the math on how you're positively impacting the environment?
Hickman manages roughly about 10,000 acres under their FSC program, but they have several other properties that are in places where we're concerned that it may be subdivided or sold, that we don't put in the FSC program because there's a
a turnover issue. So probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 acres that they're managing sustainably. As far as the carbon sequestration, we are only harvesting about 25 to 30% of the volume that's produced every year. We have not done the numbers on that as far as how much carbon we're holding in the woods, but we have had some discussion in the last 3 or 4 months about possibly getting into the carbon program. In the past, it's been so difficult and expensive to do that, and now there's new things coming down the pipe that are going to make it a little bit easier. And we do inventories all the time, so it's something that they're definitely looking at.
Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I-
Karen had a good question too about when you're purchasing lumber from other folks. Do you have any guidelines that they have to meet when you purchase from them?
We buy some green lumber from some local mills, but by and large, most of our lumber for our flooring plant comes from our own production. How lumber is kiln dried is such an important part of the equation, and you can't look at a chunk of wood and tell if it's been dried properly or not. And I know we dry our stuff right, so I just want to make sure that our flooring plant is starting with the best raw material it can. And we really buy, very seldom do I ever buy any kiln dried lumber from anybody. It's all our own stuff.
Gotcha. And, oh, did you have anything to add, Jessica? Okay, no, okay. Kirsten had another good question about, have you looked into any of the other certifications like FSI, or do you feel like you're, just gonna stick with FSC and that covers everything that you think is important? Or have you been approached about other certifications?
When we got into the FSC program, it was the premier program. Now they all seem to be jockeying back and forth. SFI and the tree farm system has come a long ways and caught up to FSC, but I don't know if it would benefit the company to be dual certified.
Yeah, I don't know that either. And at the time, and I honestly, I've never really looked much at any of the other ones. For the longest time, the FSC was the only one that had a third-party verification. So in a lot of the other ones, you could just sign up and say, oh, we're sustainable because we signed up for this. But the FSC was the only one that was actually legitimizing it. I don't know if any of the other ones do that now. Do they? Okay.
Well, and I think that's a good point, Denny. And one of the things that I have always thought was interesting about your story is that you've been managing the forest sustainably, and when the certification became available, the question was, do I do the extra paperwork and pay the money to get the third-party certification just to prove that I'm doing something I'm already doing right? And a lot of other manufacturers and producers and even, building project teams have that same dilemma of, well, I'm doing it the right way. Do I have to pay this money and do this paperwork? But you're right in terms of the third-party certification. It just adds that, stamp of approval that really makes it easier for people to either have that information translated to them or to have that level of comfort. Natalie has a really good question here, and we're gonna, this will be the last question before the next video, but Denny, Mike, and Jessica, I want you each to answer this. Thank you, Natalie. What is your favorite tree species and why?
Depends on what we're running this morning. I've always been a fan of white oak, but I mean, I like them all. They're really, like I said, I couldn't tell you, if I was to build a new house right now, I don't know what I would, be my primary thing. I know recently we did a quarter sawn hard maple herringbone floor, And, you know, I came home from work and told my wife, I said, oh, we got to build a new room on the house, dear. You know, it was really nice. But I don't know. I've always kind of liked it. But yeah. The only thing I would put out of the list is hickory. I'm not a fan of hickory.
Okay.
Hickory's a pain in the neck from the minute it goes on the debarker, and it's a tough wood, and so many people do hickory that it's you don't get a lot of money for it, right? So
yeah,
we just stay away from it.
Well, Mike, you spend all your time in the forest. What's your favorite?
Yeah, and I'm going to get shouted down for this, I'm sure, because I agree with Denny that all the hardwood species are really important because of the food they produce and the value of them. But my favorite species is probably white pine. They grow so large and so tall, and we very rarely cut one on Hickman timber property. But they grow tall enough you can grow hardwoods underneath them. They provide good roosting places for turkeys, and we have eagles' nest in some of our big white pine. And it's just such a majestic tree. And like I said, you can still grow hardwood underneath it.
That's awesome. Thank you. Jessica, what's your favorite tree species?
Okay. Probably a mix of two. So, you know, white oak, I like white oak, obviously, with the whole process of what we do a lot of, but I also like it as a tree because I really like the fact that it focuses on its roots first, and you know, years you put into the roots before it really sprouts out, you know. So some of the forestry techniques of like helping with oak production, they actually do like controlled burns, because the oak's roots are so strong that it can survive like a small burn, and then it can sprout out. So I always thought that was really cool. I also like beech, which is kind of like overwhelming in the woods a little bit. It can get too much, but I think it's a cool species because it's a clone, like an aspen, and so it does kind of clone up. They call it like a mother of the woods, if they kind of call it. I think it's kind of a neat tree, and it's a really cool. We do a ripped and quartered beech floor, which is a really kind of unique too. So that's kind of something different that we do. But it's a pretty tree too.
That's awesome. Thank you guys for answering those. You guys, those are all really good questions. Thank you for the conversation. For fun, if anybody wants to enter their favorite tree in the chat, go for it. I know mine is ginkgo personally, but y'all just, you know, put your favorite trees in the chat if you want. So now we're all going to turn off our videos again. And Anthony, I think you can play the next video.
If they done grow in Western PA, it's not worth a damn. So we're standing here in front of a pile of nice red oak logs. We were out of the woods earlier, saw them cutting some white oak. Red oak and white oak are our two primary species that we'll cut. We like big logs like this. This is a red oak log. You're about 2 foot diameter on this log. This is a great log for quarter sawing. So what this will do, when we go in there, the guy will get a couple slabs off square up a face. The sawyer's going to look at this. We'll see this split here. So we'll bust this into 4 pieces. And then each of this piece is going to get sawed up from the inside out of this triangle. So you get these annual rings are going to be perpendicular to the face. That's what makes a good quarter sawn. That's what makes for the good dimensionally stable flooring, because in the quarter sawn, when wood expands or contracts, it moves along your annual rings. So a plain sawn piece of flooring, if you were cutting a log just normal and your board comes out like this, your annual rings are going like this, okay? The quarter sawn, now your annual rings are perpendicular to the face. So when wood expands or contracts, it moves along those annual rings. So in plain sawn flooring, your expansion and contractions in your width, you'll get that seasonal movement. Quarter sawn, your expansion and contractions in your thickness, so it's much more stable dimensionally. And on top of that, it looks cool, man. It doesn't look like it came from a box store. It's nice stuff. All right, so now we're gonna go show you the sawmill, see what goes on in there. So head up this way. And you see the debarker. The barker is pretty self-explanatory. It takes the bark off the trees, okay? That bark we sell to people that are making mulch, landscape people, that type of stuff. You'll see the head saw. The head saw is just a big circle saw. Basically, he's taking the slabs off and breaking this down. Then it goes upstairs to the resaw. You got a 7-foot Fowler and Stall resaw on a 23.5 degree slant.
So we have 3 different ways of cutting our wood. We have a plain sawn, we have live sawn, and we have rift and quarter sawn. Plain sawn would be like this, where it has the grains going in a cathedral pattern. Rift and quarter sawn is the grains going straight back and forth like this. And then the live sawn, plain sawn down the middle, and then the rift and quarter on the side. The difference between the rift and quarter sawn and live sawn, on the edge of the grain, it goes up and down. It's more stable that way because when it expands and contracts, it moves up and down rather than in and out like it would be plain sawn. The live sawn is just as stable because it has the quarter sawn on the sides of the grain, where the plain sawn is in the middle. It expands and contracts going perpendicular. Live sawn, the way it is cut, we're cutting it straight through the heart of the wood, where you'll have the quarter sawn on the sides of the logs and the plain sawn in the middle. So that gives the rift and quarter on the side here, plain sawn in the middle. Live sawn logs are basically anywhere from 9-inch logs to 15-inch logs. The rift sawn, we're quarter the logs, and the rift sawn boards come from the smaller part of the logs, where the grain starts to roll over, and you just get the straight grains, and you don't get the fleck in it like you do the quarter sawn. The quarter sawn is mostly in the wider part of the logs, and you're getting those at a 17 to an upper inch logs. The plain sawn, we're just taking the better face off each side. The plain sawn grain goes across the width of the wood, so therefore it expands and contracts going in and out. Where the quarter sawn and rift sawn goes up and down, and that way expands and contracts going to thickness. We cut rift and quarter sawn because we happen to be one of the few companies in Pennsylvania that cut rift and quarter sawn, and it may be a little more expensive, but it takes longer to dry. It used to be more wasteful, but not anymore with the technology we have. We're able to get good yield out of each log, and it's very unique. It's a nice product to have in your home.
I get a lot of people that will get their floor and everything that we do is unfinished, and they'll be like, I want it to look just like this. I want it to look raw. I want it to look like it's unfinished. And it's cool because there are finishes out there now that can really get that low sheen, matte finish, and it looks almost like a raw floor. And so that's a really popular look right now. And thankfully, we have the natural beauty of the wood with the medullary rays from the quarter sawn figure and the tight grain and the growth rings, and just a very beautiful natural wood product that can't be copied. You just can't reproduce it from anything else. Just real wood. It shows the life and has a story from the tree that you can see in the floor. It makes it really beautiful.
100% of that log that comes into our mill is used. The bark is used for landscapers. The sawdust we use as fuel for our boiler to run our dry kilns. The edgings, the slabs, all go through the chipper, which go to the paper mills. And then the lumber itself is used from high-end furniture to flooring to industrial lumber. So there's nothing that's wasted out of anything that we use. What's happening here, all the waste from the mill comes out a conveyor to the chipper, grinds up all the slabs, all the edges, all the waste. The chips go to the paper mills. The sawdust is screened out, blown up here, and we use the sawdust as our fuel for the boiler to run the dry kilns. In the summertime, we're burning maybe 25 cubic yards a day. In the wintertime, between 85 and 90 cubic yards of sawdust gets burned every day in here. So let's go in and show you the boiler. So this is our boiler, 500 horsepower, Hearst boiler. Sawdust is augered in through the bottom. Got over fire air, under fire air. It's not working super hard. It's about 800 degrees in there right now. So, all right, so now that we've seen the sawmill, let's walk over, see how lumber's dried in the kilns, the air drying, and why that's important.
Okay. Awesome. Did that still play smoothly for everybody?
Yep.
Pretty good? Okay, awesome. I feel like we're testing fate today, showing all the videos over Zoom, but I'm so glad it's working because like I said, this just can't be replicated any other way. So I'm so glad that you're all able to see this. We're gonna go into the next video in a couple minutes, but we have time for probably about 2 questions if people have them. I love that you're all putting your favorite trees into the chat. Thank you for that. Does anybody have a question about what you just saw? I'll give everybody a second and then I'll start asking my questions. Okay. One of the things that you know, that I love about that part of the video is what you talk about, Denny, in terms of you know, nothing being wasted. And I think that, you know, speaks a lot to the process. And I think a lot of people here really appreciate that. So I think that's really neat to see. One question that I have actually, I think is related to the first video in terms of, I think Denny, you mentioned that you don't necessarily just, you know, follow all of the trends in terms of if something is really popular, you don't just go into the forest and cut all of that thing because it's popular right now, because there's a more of a long-term view. Do you feel like, do you ever lose business that way? Or do you think that, you know, that decision sometimes can harm, you know, financially? Or do you feel like it still works out because you're producing, you know, a lot of different types of products that that are more timeless?
Yeah, I mean, it's the way we look at that is just managing the forest right. You know, because you can't, you're looking at such a long-term commitment here. You know, Mike and I have had the conversation in the past. You know, cherry is a species that'll fluctuate wildly, right? There's been times when we've sold cherry veneer logs for up to $12 a board foot. Right now, you can't give away a cherry log, okay? It's terrible. And it's like, okay, so when the cherry market is really high, do we manage for cherry? Because even one common cherry would be worth more than face and better red oak at times. Right now, it's not. So, you know, who knows what it's going to be in 10 years. So let's just go ahead and do what's right for the woods, and we'll take it as it comes, you know?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The long game. Christine Fox, it looks like you had a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, it's my wife's Zoom,
Sorry.
not mine. But when you do quarter sawn logs and you get out to the very edge, you get very narrow width boards. What do you do with those? You can't use them for flooring, or what do you do with them?
You can, yeah. That's why, you know, in the 2 1/4 floor, you know, typically we sell a rift and quartered mix. The narrower you go, the higher the percentage of rift sawn is. Okay, that's another thing that's frustrating to me, is where, you know, architects come in and they want 8-inch rift only. Well, if you look at those diagrams, how we saw the logs, those wider boards are heavily quarter sawn. Okay, it's almost, it's very hard to get wide rift sawn boards unless you have, you know, 36-inch diameter logs, which just don't exist much, right? The rift only is a very much in fashion right now, and because of where we're located here, we don't have a lot of the subspecies of white oak. Ours is all pretty much the Quercus alba. It's the pure white oak, so it's very uniform color. So when somebody wants that rift only floor, that's always been my argument with them, is that rift only floor is very vanilla. I mean, you really can't tell where one board stops and the other one starts. So a 4-inch is fine. You don't need to go to 8-inch. See what I'm saying? So yeah, as you get into those narrower boards, it makes a narrower flooring, and it's heavily rift sawn.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Larry, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Good morning. So I work with some other companies, and we've recognized the paper mills with a cutback during COVID. Are they back to taking the materials that they were prior to the slowdown?
Yeah, pretty much. We've got 3 different ones that we work with. The GP has a plant in Mount Jewett. There's one in Johnsonburg, and then in Clarion they have a fiberboard plant. So yeah, they're all pretty much back to where they were.
Great, thank you. I'm going to do 2 more quick questions, then we'll go to the next video. Someone asked, how many employees do you have?
Oh, I don't even know. We could use half a dozen, you know,
More.
if you could find them. Yeah.
I think
Right.
the sawmill's probably got what, about 20?
No, maybe, yeah, I don't know. I don't even know where we're at right now. 25 or 30 to sawmill and 15 or 18 at the flooring plant probably.
Okay.
Then there's the woods guys. You know, we have the foresters, we have the office staff. I don't know even.
But that's definitely one of my brother, he's Jake Hickman, he does the sawmill, runs the sawmill, and that's his biggest problem is trying to find guys. I mean,
Right.
what he hired last year, probably 20 guys.
No, I think he told me he had 38 guys last year. He said, okay, you
Pretty
start
hired.
Monday.
I remember you told me
10
that.
of them didn't even show up the first day. I think 10 of them didn't last one day. Yeah, we had like 3 guys that were there for 3 months. It had been that long, you know. It's you can't find it. As soon as you say, oh, okay, we got to take a drug test, they say, oh, well, I'm out.
Oh, no. Well, Hickman Woods is hiring. If anybody knows anybody, Allegheny Mountain Hardwood, send them their way. I want to go ahead and start the next video, but my last question, as short as you can, how many do you think of your competitors that that don't have hold on, let me make sure I read this right for Alexander. What percentage of your non-FSC competitors do you think sustainably manage their forests but don't pay for the certification? Do you think that's a common thing?
I would think, I don't have any idea, is a simple answer there. I don't know. I don't have enough time to pay attention to what other guys are doing. You know,
Yeah.
I would think that most of the mills that own their own timberland are cognizant of it. Okay. It's an investment that company has done or that family has done, and they're not gonna, you know, they're thinking about it the same way as we were. In fact, at the time when the FSC first started getting busy, I was on the board of the PFPA, Pennsylvania Forest Products Association, and there was a lot of opposition to it, where you know, a lot of guys would say, I don't need somebody telling me we're doing it right. We've been doing it right for years, and I don't need some, you know, academic pinhead telling me that we're doing it right. And just like, I think most guys are, but I don't know.
You have to keep it.
Yeah, I mean, overall, the Pennsylvania forest growth has been, I mean, there's a lot more trees now than there were 100 years ago. You know, I mean, overall, the industry is really, you know, sustainable. You know, FSC is better because then you know where it's coming from for sure. But yeah, I mean, local is always local Pennsylvania hardwoods, local American hardwoods overall are really good.
That's really good to know. That's a great perspective. Well, thank you. You guys, these are excellent
One other
questions.
point I want to make, if I can.
Yeah.
See this picture behind me?
Yeah.
All right. Today is the anniversary of Bill Mazeroski's walk-off home run in the 1960 World Series. Greatest walk-off home run in the history of baseball. Today's the
You guys
anniversary.
heard it here.
Yep.
Very important. This is a very special time for us to be doing this with you. Thank you
Us
for
Pirate fans don't have a lot to grasp for.
I love it. I love it. Okay, great. Well, we're going to watch the third video and we'll come back, okay?
So what we're doing, you know, we're shooting at a target moisture content here.
Gas, that's fine.
Right
Yeah,
off the
we got
side,
in
we're
very
looking
late
at
on Friday night. He asked
high
us to
80s,
take a look at.
moisture content. I've actually, you know, cut samples on green poplar that when you do the math, it actually comes out that it's over 100% moisture content. You know, there's a lot of water in this stuff. But, you know, green white oak, you're looking at about 6.2 pounds per board foot is what it weighs. Kiln dried, you're at about 3.1, so half the weight is water. You'll see when we load these dry kilns, these stacks, each board is going to shrink about 1/8 of an inch in thickness. So this stack of lumber, when we take it out of the dry kiln, that stack will be 2 foot shorter than what it was when it went in. But one of the things you'll see at the flooring plant on these wider live sawn, what we have the ability to do, we have 4 movable saw rip saw you'll see over there. So you take a piece like this, 14 inches, you know, we'll be able to, you know, maybe get a 4 or 5 inch of quarter sawn off of this. We'll get a piece of plain sawn out of the middle and another 4 or 5 inch piece of rift and quartered. On these smaller logs, these 14-inch logs, if you actually cut those into quarters and quarter saw them, there's so much stress that there's so much side bend in the kilns that that board won't stay straight. So by leaving these wide pieces, drying them as a wide piece, they stay flat, they stay straight, then we can rip the quarter sawn. So we're getting a lot of quarter sawn out of these smaller logs that we typically weren't able to previously. The other thing you'll notice here, some of this has green wax on it, some of it has the white wax. At the mill, the green lumber is all sprayed with wax to keep the ends from drying out too fast. Under the FSC guidelines, we have to be able to show the FSC certified stuff from the non-FSC certified. So anything with the green ends is certified, the white is non-certified. All right, so this is a dry kiln that is in the process of being loaded. It's going to be changed around a little bit, but basically this is one of the 60,000 foot kilns. It's important when you're loading a kiln and you're stacking your lumber that you see all the stickers. The 3x4s are all in a straight line. That way your weight is compressed in the same spot. That keeps good flat lumber, okay? The temperature in this kiln is going to start low. We'll start below 100 degrees, but we're going to have high humidity in there. Then as the samples dry, we go in and get samples every day. Those are weighed. There's some simple algebra. As the lumber dries, you increase the temperature, you drop the humidity, till at the end, we'll be at 160 degrees in there with very low humidity, maybe 10 or 12%. So the process on this flat sawn white oak, you're looking at about 50 days, 50, 55 days is what that is going to be in the dry kilns, how long that's going to take to dry properly. Quarter sawn takes a little bit longer. You're looking at closer to 60 days on drying quarter sawn in 4-quarter white oak quarter sawn. Other species, soft maple, cherry, you can be a little more aggressive. Soft maple you can dry in 2 weeks to 14, 17, 18 days, something like that. But the white oak, your denser hardwoods take longer to dry. And you've got to be very careful. You don't want to dry it too slow. You get mold growing in there that stains it. You don't want to dry it too fast because then you'll get season checks that open up. So it's a real tricky, taking the right amount of moisture out each day so it looks good when it comes out. So now we'll go to the control room. We'll show you how we manage the temperature and the humidity in the dry kilns.
Awesome. Okay, cool. I know we might have a question or two, but I wanted to see, Jessica or Denny, do you want to tell people anything about the control room video they're about to see and why it's special? Let's see if we can hear you.
Well, basically in a dry kiln, you have a dry bulb thermometer. You have one on each side, okay? You have a bank of fans on the top that every 6 hours the fans change directions. Blow air this direction and they blow air back through the other direction. You also have a wet bulb thermometer in there, which is just a pencil thermometer that has a wick on it in a reservoir of water. Your water is the same temperature as your air. You have charts that tell you at a given temperature where to set your wet bulb to achieve the humidity that you want.
That next video we'll talk
Am I
about.
talking about? Okay,
Yeah, so
all
we
right.
cover that with the control room.
All right, all right.
It's okay. Yeah, I just thought people might want a little bit of like a, preliminary, if there's anything extra that you wanted to say about what they're going to see, or
I don't know what they're gonna see. I haven't seen it yet.
let's go take a look. I could take one question if anybody has one question before we go into the next video. Or should we just go for it and then we'll have some more time?
Yeah, it's all about the drying process still. So
Let's check it out. Okay, let's do it, Anthony.
So here we are. This is the control room for 3 of the dry kilns. Okay, so what we have here are charts. The red line is the air temperature that's inside that dry kiln. The blue line is what's called a wet bulb thermometer. Okay, so there's a pencil thermometer in there. It has a wick on it, the reservoir water. That water is the same temperature as the air. So we have charts that tell us what relative humidity to set the wet bulb at that corresponds with the dry bulb. So when you load a dry kiln, when you have green, high moisture content wood, see these lines are very close together. Low temperature, 100, 110 degrees with high relative humidity. So as the lumber is in there drying, you have fans that blow. 6 hours one direction, then they change 6 hours the other direction. As the water is extracted from the lumber, it picks up on this wet bulb thermometer. When it goes above your set point, that triggers the vents on the roof to open. Your excess moisture goes out into the atmosphere. And that what controls how fast you dry is how much time your vents are open. So as the lumber gets drier, these lines will get further apart. Your red line will go up, the blue line will go down. So we're at the end, we'll be at 160 degrees, or 160 degrees with 50. Yeah, with about 11% relative humidity in there. So that's what happens. So every day the guys go in, we've got 8 sample boards in the kilns, okay? The sample board is weighed on the scale. Every day it's recorded and it's kept track of, okay? On white oak, you're maxing out at about 1.5% a day. If you go too fast, you're gonna check the wood, you'll explode the cells inside. If you go too slow, you get mold that grows on there, and it'll stain the wood. Having dry kilns is about like dairy cattle. It's a 7-day-a-week job. There's somebody here a couple times a day Saturday, there's a couple times a day Sunday. There's just never a day off with these things. Another thing that you have to watch as the lumber's drying, your outside wants to dry faster than the inside of the board does, okay? That's your shell, that's your core. So several times during the process, we'll come in here, cut a chunk off, throw that away, and cut about a 3/4 inch piece off of here. Then we'll take it to the bandsaw where we cut the shell off, weigh these on a gram scale, put them in this oven. We weigh the core, weigh that in the oven. What we don't want is to be a big difference in the moisture content between the shell and the core, because then there's stress develops, okay? This is one of the steps that we do partway through. So you can see the shell was a lot wetter than the core. That's why it shrunk more. That's why these pieces move so much. At the end, when we would do this, if you would do this at the very end, because once you've gotten the moisture to where you want it, we're going to blow live steam in there for about 30 hours. Another thing we do is when we make our engineered floor. On an engineered flooring, you're going to take a piece of 4/4 and it's going to get sawed into multiple pieces. If you have stresses in that, when you resaw that piece, they're going to cup and buckle up on you. But ours go through the frame and saw and come out flat and straight and true. So it's all as a result of what happens in those dry kills. But
Okay,
you
that
watch a lot. And at the end of the kill, before we bring that lumber out of the kill, we're going to do this other shell and core test to make sure that we've got between 6 and 8% moisture in the center of the board, in the core. Some mills will just weigh that piece of wood. The math says it's 7%. Okay, it's good to go. Well, maybe you've got 2% on the shell, but you've got 10 or 12% in the core. This piece of wood goes to the flooring plant. It's surfaced. It's run through the molder. All that dry wood just went out the bag house. And now you're left with a piece of flooring that's 10% moisture content, which is too high. Because if the flooring ends up in a semi-arid environment like Albuquerque or Denver, 10% moisture content, it's going to shrink. You're going to get gaps. You're going to have problems with that. So the drying of the lumber is a really important part. That's why we don't buy lumber from the outside. There's a couple mills that I will buy from on occasion because I trust their drying, but by and large, it's all our own production. It's all our own wood. And you can't really look at a piece of wood and tell if it's been dried properly or not, but how that floor is going to lay in some woman's house a year from now has an awful lot to do with it.
okay. Very interesting. We already have a couple quick questions before we go to the next video. Steve, it looks like you had a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
How's that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you dry any other thicknesses other than 4/4?
We cut 5/4, but that's the thickest we do. I don't cut any 8/4 or anything. If you're going to cut wide quarter sawn, you need the same log if you're going to cut 8/4. So you can't do both. And
Sure.
we choose to cut wide quarter sawn as opposed to 8/4.
Okay. Very good.
Well,
Yeah, we one more. We recently purchased some live sawn white oak from you folks. Very nice stock.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Karen, I see, I think, and Karen, you can unmute yourself if you want, but were you surprised by the adding live steam for 30 hours? I don't know if you can unmute yourself, Karen. Can you speak any more to that process, Denny, of adding the live steam?
Well, that just kind of softens that shell up, and loosens up those tensions that's in there. Yeah, it's a pretty involved thing, and it takes a lot of years of cutting these little samples and watching how they react and things like that till you really learn it, But that's an important part of it. You have to do that.
Sounds like an
And
art.
the different species, the more dense species take longer. Your softer hardwoods like your soft maple and cherry and walnut do not take nearly as long as red oak and white oak do.
Yeah, it's quite the process. Well, how about we watch we have one more video, and then we should have some time after that for some final questions and discussion. So I think we can probably go for it.
So now we're in the flooring mill at Allegheny Mountain Hardwood Flooring. Earlier you saw the rough mill where we were taking the rough lumber and turning it into the molder blanks. Now here's where the blanks actually get turned into flooring. Here at the molder, what the fellow's doing that feeds the molder, he's looking at each piece. He knows which face is going to be the good face coming out. He knows what side is making the tongue, what side is making the groove. So he can flip the board over, he can spin it end for end, trying to maximize getting the highest value piece of flooring out of each piece of wood as he feeds it into the machine. Pat Best is our plant manager here. So for the most part, I'm going to let Pat explain to you what the process is and what happens.
Yeah, wood comes from the building down below where it was just ripped out, comes up through the molder. There are two different molders. The molder we're looking at right now has a 12-inch capacity. It's got 6 different heads. The first head does a little bit of hogging, levels everything out. So it goes through nice and smooth through the rest of it. Second 2 heads are side heads that mill the tongue and groove into the sides. A rough head on top that kind of hogs away extra material. Then a finish head on the top and a groove and relief cut on the bottom. When it comes out the other end, it is a finished piece of flooring to go on down to the chopper end matcher on the other end. All right, so over here, we got a guy standing with a crayon marking the defects, sends it on down a conveyor. This Marinus machine takes out the defects, chops it, end matches it, disposes of the waste, and shoots the good product out the other side. And there'll be a couple of guys standing down on the next conveyor, sorting out the various grades. The first carts, as they're coming out, very first cart here is clear, ripped and quartered. Very clean grade, no sapwood, no defects, mix of ripped and quartered figure. Second cart we have is select and better, still a clean grade. No knots, but has color variation, lots of rift and quartered figure. Then we've got a natural grade of rift and quartered white oak, allows for all sorts of color variation, sound knots. Then next card is live sawn white oak, has a mix of grains, plain sawn grain, rift and quartered characteristics, sound knots, and lots of color variation. And we've got a special order on long length live sawn. This is custom length mix, 11 foot and longer. Same grade as the shorter cart, but just a custom length. And we've got a long length 7 foot and longer ripped and quartered select and better wood. Still the same grade. It allows color variation and all sorts of ripped and quartered characteristics. Very tiny pin knots possibly, but we don't like to keep a bunch of that in. Then we've got a ripped and quartered natural in a long length, 7 foot and longer, out to 12 feet. You can see looking at that, there's not really a whole lot of color variation. It's pretty uniform color. It allows for color variation, but
we need more color variation in the red oak, but our white oak's pretty uniform. Because we don't have a lot of the subspecies of white oak. It's all Quercus alba. You get further south, you get a lot more swamp oak and bur oak and chestnut oak and different things like that. Ours is pretty much all just a Quercus alba, pure white oak, so it's all very uniform color.
So, and then on down the very last cart is just another cartload of 7 foot and longer live sawn, mix of grains and sound knots. Plain sawn grain and rift and quartered grain. Makes a very beautiful floor.
So this is an example of our live sawn with the hand scrape. Now the live sawn, we were talking at the sawmill earlier, I showed you some of those logs, and this is a great example. We've got some of the plain sawn cathedral grain in the center, but then as the annual rings get more perpendicular, you're showing the quarter sawn on the edges. So one piece has plain sawn and quarter sawn in it. It's really neat. Now this is one of our hand scrape pieces. So you were watching Russ a minute ago scrape. So the big thing about our hand scraping, when we first started doing it, I was looking what was available on the market, and I didn't see anything that looked real. A lot of the machine scrape stuff, it just didn't look real. So we came up with our own style to really make it look like a foot-worn floor instead of something that some guy beat the tar out of. So it looks pretty nice. It's costs a lot, but it's pretty nice stuff. So you've got the plain saw and cathedral grain here in the center, okay? But then on these small logs, if you look at the end, you can see your annual rings are getting perpendicular, so you're seeing this quarter sawn figure all along here. It's you get some finish on this, that's just going to pop, and it's going to be a really exciting piece of flooring. This is a piece of 10-inch wide flooring, 11 feet high. It's like picking up a whole picnic table on one board, man. Probably the thing that I'm most proud of is that, you know, we're growing this timber locally and we're turning this into floors that are going to be there for a long time, and floors that are recognized. I had a guy call me one time that went into a place and he's called me and said, "Hey, is this your floor in this place?" And I said, "Yeah." "How'd you know?" He said, "Nobody makes floors that look like this." And the guy recognized that it was an Allegheny floor. And you know, so I'm not that artistic gene was pretty much bred out by the time it got to me, but I can see floors and I can visualize that kind of stuff, and that's one thing I think is cool, that our floors are going to be around in people's houses or in museums or you know, places like this for years and years to come. It's all coming out of this little town in western PA. It sits along the river.
It's very satisfying to have kids and grandkids involved in the business now and carry on the interest in sustainable harvesting. It will help to make sure that the resource lasts a long time.
You know, I mean, as a kid, I remember my great-grandfather, who was, you know, the painter, and he was big. Of course, I was little. He seemed very tall to me then. I don't know how big he was. But then my grandfather, Harry Hickman, he was a big guy. He was 6'3", and those old farmers had hands like bear paws on them. You know, he was a big, tough guy. But I remember one time as he was getting older, he had to go to the hospital, get an MRI for something, I don't know what, and I had asked him, I said, "What did they find when they did the MRI?" He said, "Sawdust." So, but yeah, no, so growing up around the sawmill and the fact that he lived right across the road from it, so, you know, their office was in the house. There wasn't an office at the sawmill. The office was over at their house, so even as a little kid, I'd go to work with Dad, spend the day with Grandma, but maybe go over and hang out around the sawmill. And I mean, he'd have me, I was shoveling sawdust and, you know, holding stuff while he welded it, or, you know, just all kind of things.
Pop Larry, he just loves being in the woods. I mean, he grew up, you know, playing the woods, and he's just cool how passionate he is about the woods, and you know, I mean, he's in his 80s already, and he's still every day, you know, if you call or talk to him, is very much like, "So how are we on Walnut?" You know, like, what's it looking like? You know, what do we need more of, or what's the trends, or what's happening in the industry? And he's just, you know, it's been part of his life, and it's just not something that you can retire from whenever he's built this. And I feel very fortunate to be able to be part of this family business and to grow up with it and really, really appreciate it, because, like, you know, like we said, we weren't expected to come into it. It wasn't something that we were like forced to, okay, this is your life, growing up, this is your destiny. You're going to be here working in, Western Pennsylvania. And, but it's something that we chose and I chose, and I'm grateful for it.
How you doing? Okay, sit down now. Sit down now. It's sure great to have your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids so close. This could be generation number 5 in Hickman Lumber Company. Who knows? Maybe she'll be the president someday. Or Henry, maybe even.
Hi, Henry. You're going to be president.
I love that. Awesome. And I think, Jessica, that was your daughter in the pink dress, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was Elle.
Next generation. Very interesting. I love hearing about that history. Well, we have about 10 minutes left to go. Does anybody have any additional questions that they want to put in the chat? Or if you want to unmute and ask your question. I think the coolest thing about that video, I thought, was the lasers above the beams that were helping to maximize the yield. Right. Did I understand that right? I thought that was really cool. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, we have a good reminder from Paul. Do you want to go over the principles of the FSC certification? I can pull up the slide if you want.
Yeah, I mean, you could show it. I mean, that's just, if anybody has any more FSC specific questions, we can talk about all that was involved. I mean, it's more than just managing the forest properly. It's all about the community. It's about the employees. It's a whole, holistic approach to being FSC certified. So it's more than just how we manage the forest. It's a pretty intensive list that they had to, check off when that first got started. But that's, if anybody's got questions on that, there's
yeah, I've got it pulled up here in case anybody wants to see it. Lori, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Hi. Yeah, thanks for all the info. I was just wondering if all of your products are sort of considered solid products, or if any of them are considered engineered products.
We do make engineered flooring. Yeah. Good.
It's all from the same lumber. So, our engineered, there's all different kind of levels of engineered quality out there. So our engineered, we're going to make, it's going to be either 3/4 inch or a 5/8 option. But the wear layer, which is what's important about how long that floor is going to last and if it can be refinished, the wear layer on the engineered is going to be either a 4 millimeter or even we can do a 6 millimeter, which is really comparable with the wear layer of the solid floor. So we can do both options. Basically anything we do in a solid, we can make in the engineered as well. And it's the same lumber that we're using to make it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think one question I have looking at these principles, I think it's really interesting that in the principles they talk about, certainly environmental impacts, but also social impacts of the forest management. What types of, or do you have examples of like the workers' rights and employment conditions that are mandated through FSC or incentivized by FSC that might be different than what you would find elsewhere? Or again, is it typical sort of like just common sense best practices that you just have to prove through the certification?
No, that's you.
Mike?
The FSC doesn't dictate as to how things can be done, but they have in the audits, what we're required to do is show that we meet a list of criteria. They won't specifically tell us that, for instance, that a feller in the woods has to use a certain type of chainsaw or chaps or anything like that, but they are required to have safety training. So as far as them dictating what we're doing, they don't do that. the safety stuff in the sawmill is probably the same as it is in any other sawmill. The safety in the woods is the same as it would be for a crew for another mill. So like I said, it's not dictated to us, but we have to prove during the audits that they are trained properly.
The FSC is an international, so the standards are the same for what we're doing as what they're doing in the, Brazilian rainforest if they're FSC certified. So sometimes, like the checking with the indigenous people in Western Pennsylvania, I mean, we reached out to the tribe in Salamanca, but there was, so we had to do all that background stuff to get certified. But it's not so relevant.
Yeah. I think it's good for folks who are specifying products to see, because a lot of what's being, I'd say a lot of what's being discussed in, the green building industry is considering all of those different impacts of the products that you choose. And so I think that's really interesting to see that. Karen had a question. Karen, do you want to try to unmute and ask your question, or do you want me to ask your question? Let's see. I'll go ahead and ask it for you, Karen. So with, changes in climate and other challenges like invasive species, are there any changes that you have to consider, moving forward that might be different? And this is, I think, a really good question for Mike in terms of the forest management. Are you seeing any changes in how you have to make decisions or manage the forest, or anything that you're anticipating?
We haven't had to make any changes with the hardwood forest. I think with the climate change issue that's going to take such a long time for it to happen that we may go into a different cycle where it's already cooling off before we have southern species, moving north. At this point, we're not doing anything different because the change has been so slight, so gradual, that it's not having an effect on the species that we're managing here.
The invasive species, though, has definitely been an issue, like the emerald ash borer that kind of wiped out all the ash trees a few years ago. I mean, you held out as long as you could. It was coming from like Michigan, right, and working its way east, and you held out as long as you could before we went ahead and harvested everything. But once we realized there was not much hope for anything, that all. We, harvested that. There's the spotted lantern fly that's out east right now in Pennsylvania. That's a really big concern.
Yeah.
I think there's been a couple that's found in the Pittsburgh area. I don't think there's been anything up here. Maybe I saw on the map like Oil City or something, but they were talking about that the other day. But yeah, mostly it's all east right now, Philadelphia area. But that's a concern. But I don't think right now we're doing anything changing management stuff, right?
Okay.
Invasive species are such a unique problem because obviously they're not found here, so they don't have anything that's native that attacks them. So that's something doesn't matter whether it's insects or plants, they are an issue in the woods, and you just you've got to address it. Yeah.
Well, I think that was a really good question. And I think, we're just about at time, but I had two sort of related questions. And then Paul had a question about deer, but Paul had a question and Alexander had a question sort of about, number one, how many products do you sell outside of Pennsylvania? And then also in terms of the FSC certification, do you find that people seek you out because they're specifically looking for an FSC certification, or do you find that you have to market and educate the clients about that? And I know, Denny, you spoke a little bit to this earlier, but do you ever have somebody call you and say, oh, I saw that you had FSC wood and I want to come to you for that? Or what's that sort of balance?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the FSC program, we might be the only one that does quarter sawn. So when there is an FSC quarter sawn product, we're a spec. We're about the only game in town. So it's not uncommon for like, a project at university or something where the architect will write us into the specs, and I will get a handful of different contractors all ask me to quote the same flooring, you know, so I give them all the same number. So whatever they mark on it, you know, I'm going to get the job. It just doesn't know which contractors are going to buy it.
And as far as homeowners, we do definitely get a lot of people that call us and find the FSC, they like the idea of it. We found out a long time ago that we couldn't really charge more for the FSC because, you know, people are like, oh, I like the idea of it, but it costs more, you know, it's you know, so unless it's like a LEED certified building, you know, then they, you know, definitely need the FSC. Most homeowners that will buy it, they like the idea of it. They don't need the paperwork, so we don't have to stamp it and sell it as FSC. It's still probably coming from the FSC forest, but we definitely do get leads from it. I have a lot of information on our website. We've done a lot of blogs. That's been my big thing since I started back with the company, is helping educate, you know, which is why one of the reasons we started this tour is with the FSC. So it is a big focus with ours, is trying to get that message across to everybody that how important and how, you know.
That's a good point. And I think that's, you know, that's something that is very common, you know, among other manufacturers and specifiers, is just trying to figure out, you know, what those motivating factors are behind the decision making. So, well, I think this was really fantastic. We're just at our time, and I'm so pleased that we were able to keep on time. And I want to thank the team at Fireman Creative for creating that video, because like I said, you know, I've been on this tour 6 or 7 times in person, and it is very hard to replicate it when we can't do it in person, but so that we could keep everybody, thank you, Paul, safe and healthy, we thought we'd try it from here. So I think it worked out really well. I want to thank Anthony for figuring out how to play all of those videos for everyone. I want to thank the team at Hickman, you know, Denny, Mike, and Jessica for